But there's two other fundamental things that are a driver behind this. Despite the fact that we're the richest, healthiest, longest lived generation in the history of humanity, we now have epic proportions of mental health issues. And it's my contention that the vast majority of mental health issues are brought about because people don't feel in control of their life. And if you talk to anyone from a psychological background, that tends to be the underlying impetus behind mental health issues. People just don't feel in control. They don't think they're able to alter anything, change anything, or make something work for them. And those issues are driven by the fact that we're driven from the top down and don't feel under control. Allied to the fact that a huge number of organisations, and I'm not just directing this rant at governments, because big corporations are equally as bad, big private sector organisations are equally as bad. We've deployed technology in quite often inhuman ways. Yeah, so, you know, the ubiquitous IVR box, where every phone number you ever call starts off with, you know, if you want to poke in the eye, press 1. If you want to stick your finger in your ear, press 2. You know, if you're wasting your breath trying to phone us, press 3. You know, if it's anything else, go and wait in a queue for 9 hours. That kind of inhumane customer service approach is now ubiquitous across the board, and people hate it, and they hate it with a vengeance. Trying to get anybody to do anything that doesn't result in a computer saying no is almost impossible these days. So what I'm starting to see is a backlash against that, where people say, do you know what, I'd much rather speak to a human, I'd much rather someone understand. When you start to look at the rationale behind that, it's wanting to be in control, but recognising that if you've got, say, in Europe, for instance, a population of 500 million people, you can't design a system that suits 500 million people. It's just not possible. Yeah, you need to have systems that are based on humanity. So for me, that's the driving imperative. The next thing to add to that is that a huge amount of us are now concerned about climate change and the things affecting the planet. So once again, by doing things on a global scale, on a big scale, it's very difficult to affect meaningful behaviour that minimises our output. And what I mean by that is, if you've got big global organisations, you have to fly all over the world. I worked in corporates for many years during the 70s and 80s. I spent most of my life on a plane, you know, working for big corporations, flying here, there and there. Most of it completely pointless. You get there, you tell someone off, you get on a plane and go somewhere else and tell them off. Yeah, that was seagull management, we used to call that. You fly in somewhere, scream a lot, crap all over everybody, and then fly out. So all those kind of things are starting to get people to fundamentally review where they are. So for me, that's the historical context of where we've got to. Top-down control no longer works. Top-down control is not necessary because we disseminate information in different ways. We have a number of societal things that we need to change in our behaviour. And we also have this huge mental health issue where people no longer feel respected as individuals, respected as human beings, and feel in control of their life. We then arrive at the present day where we've just experienced a classic black swan. For those of you that are not familiar with black swan is a term coined by the absolutely, how to describe him, brilliant, mad, evil, fantastic Nassim Nicholas Taleb. For those that don't know Nassim is a former trader. I actually met him once. He used to work for Credit Suisse First Blossom. I met him once years and years ago before he became famous for writing his books. He's a very well-respected trader, but he's also, he has 4 PhDs and he speaks fluently 41 languages. The man is a polymath. He's unbelievable, but he's incredibly acerbic and very rude. But if you follow him on Twitter, he has some quite funny arguments. But Nassim has written a whole series of books, one of which is The Black Swan. And a black swan is basically, it's an event that happens unexpectedly and has severe consequences, but then everybody screams, we all saw that coming, when in fact they didn't. And we are in a classic black swan at the moment. And those black swan events happen quite a lot. But because we try to manage them out, we don't cope with them very well, because we spend, and we're seeing this right now with the black swan that's ongoing at the moment with the pandemic, is that we've got loads of smart asses telling everybody how to do everything. But the reality is nobody really knows how to cope with this, and we're just doing it by the seat of our pants. So you get those kind of things. As it happens, Nassim is also a big advocate for localism too, which is just one of those things. So me and somebody clever both agree with the same thing, which is nice. But so what I see coming out of where we are in this black swan event now is an even greater drive towards localism. It just on a much more simplistic level. I don't know if you guys have found this, but the bigger supermarkets around where I live have been empty of staff. They've got security guards on the door. They're letting people in 1 and 2 at a time, so on and so forth. But my local shops, my local village shop around the clock, Dell shop in St Michael's, have been brilliant. You go in and get anything. Yeah, there's not a lot of it, but you can get what you want and you can get the basics. So, and they haven't gouged their prices. They haven't done anything like that. And 2 or 3 of the local shops have really been there and are supporting the local community. And I think people are recognising that and how important that is. The second big issue I see, and this is important for Roland and myself and other people operating the kind of space that we do, is that if you look at micro businesses, small personal service companies, and a lot of self-employed people, at the moment, their work's come to an end. It's dried up. The government have announced some schemes to help pay some of their salaries. And in some instances, you can get your business rates offset. But outside of salaries, the second biggest overhead of most businesses is their premises. And a lot of people are stuck in premises that they can't occupy. They can't even go there, yeah, because they're locked in at home, paying for very expensive premises. So one of the things that I think will be an outcome of this event, this pandemic, is a lot of people are going to be reassessing that and looking much more heavily at using places like Dragon Coworking, Fruitworks, Business Terrace, Space in Riot, all the other co-working and Neptune in Herne Bay, all the other co-working and small office unit spaces that have easy in, easy out, no long lease type stuff, working locally in communities. So I see that as a trend that's going to explode. It's already been a trend that's been happening for a few years anyway, but it's actually going to explode when this is over. So coming back to the power of community workspaces like Dragon, there are 4.9 million sole traders, self-employed people in the UK. There's 5.8 million businesses with less than 10 employees. Those people want to work with other people. One of the big things is a lot of us have now discovered working at home. And again, I think one of the other trends that will make localism a much more vibrant thing is more and more people are going to work some of the time at home. I don't know what Roland and the team at Dragon have found, but in Fruitworks, which is primarily more of a hot desking space rather than an office space, we've been going 9 years now. And what we found is a lot of our members were home workers that got kind of bomb crazy working on their own at home, or, couldn't stand the dog begging for food or something. So what we find is a lot of our membership are partial home workers and partial community workers, and they come into the community for a couple of days a week just to get some human contact and human interaction and help and assistance. And I see that as a trend that will grow and grow as well as more of us work from home. And again, coming back to the climate change issue, you know, it staggers me that we've, as a society, we've not considered helping people. You know, we're still building railway lines, for Christ's sake. We're still, you know, we're still trying to travel everywhere when there's no need for it. And, you know, as you see with this pandemic, if you look around the world at where things are worst, it's in big urban centres where people are travelling in and out every day still. So more localised, more working from home, more working in community spaces is how I see the future unfolding. Because, you know, people want that human contact. They want to work with people that they know and understand and can trust. One of the big things that we see far too often in the world at large is the scams that happen and fake news and bad information. Basically, we feel more comfortable. We're a tribal species. We're a clan species. Human beings are tribal. We like to cluster with people that we feel comfortable with, and they're people that, you know, are from our local community and the people that we can get on with. It's an interesting fact. I'm an amateur historian, and my favourite period is early Anglo-Saxon England. And one of the strange things is, despite the fact that the old Normans came over and gave us a good kicking, most common law in the UK is still based on the original Anglo-Saxon setup. And one of the interesting things is trial by jury, apart from the fact that we've actually turned it on its head. Because in its original iteration, trial by jury was a trial by 12 people that knew you. Okay? We've now said it's a trial by 12 people that don't know you. Okay? But in the first instance, it was a trial by 12 people that knew you. And the reason that they did that is they felt that 12 people would give you a good broad base of people that knew the accused and knew the character of the accused. So if you think about that in localism, if you think about that in business terms, it's about knowing the character of the people you're dealing with. It's about knowing the reputation of the people that you're dealing with. And one of the things is, if you look around Kent right now, we have a very strong small business community and a very supportive small business community. And people are always quite happy to recommend other people in the community that provides services and products and stuff like that based on their intimate knowledge of the efficacy of what they do. And I think that is one of the big drivers, again, behind localism, is that ability to get your hands on, if you like, the people that you're dealing with. And you can see the alternative. Richard Branson, Tim Martin, people like that have completely killed their brand image with their silliness during this pandemic by, you know, treating their staff badly or whatever. So reputation is everything in business. And I think reputation amongst the local community is a thing that drives the business in that community. And it's what makes it work, and it's what keeps everybody on track. Yeah, because if you work primarily in a local community, you know that if you do something untoward, people are going to know, people are going to find out, and your business is going to get damaged. So that's another one of the powerful functions behind localism and why localism works so much better. At the end of the day, though, in my humble opinion, things work best if they're driven bottom up, not top down. And you see that in every walk of life. Yeah, governments produce things like universal credit, for instance. Great idea in principle, absolutely disaster in implementation. If you look at exactly the same syndrome as universal credit, during the pandemic, the government announced a lot of support packages for different categories of people. But of course, the first thing that happened is everybody that it didn't suit went, well, hold on, that doesn't suit me. Hold on, that doesn't suit me. It's another example of a top-down thing, yeah, where you try and design something that suits everybody, even though you don't know everyone. And that's the crazy thing. For me, if you take an area, if you take Kent, which is probably quite a large area, in fact, we're the biggest non-metropolitan county in the UK, but it's quite a large area. But if you take Kent and said, well, look, I'll tell you what, the government are going to give Kent £1 billion and Kent can sort out what it needs, because Kent has a different profile to somewhere else. We have the highest number of small businesses in the United Kingdom. Yeah, we've got 144,000 small businesses in Kent. So for us, we probably need something different to that which, you know, Hampshire needs or Gloucestershire needs. But trying to impose it top down just leaves loads and loads of gaps. And like anything you try and impose top down, you end up with a computer say no approach to everything, where people trying to manage the delivery of these things are geared by what they've been told from above. And then people walk in and go, yeah, but it doesn't suit me because I want, you know, X, Y, and Z. And they go, well, sorry, I can't help. And that's where everything falls down, because we try and impose it from above rather than let it happen from underneath, rather than let it happen bottom up and give people at the local level control, because they know the people that they're dealing with. Yeah. And they you know, we do so many things. Just as a for instance, we do so many things to try and prevent people scamming the system. Yeah. But if you work at a local level, most of the local people know who the scammers are anyway. As soon as they walk into the office and go, oh, it's him again, you know, we know what he's going to do. It's about having knowledge. It's about knowing the people that you deal with. It's about dealing with them on a regular basis and getting to understand their character and drive it from the bottom up. It's about humanness. Many years ago, because I'm very old, back in the 1970s, well, probably late 1960s actually, I read a book by a chap called E.F. Schumacher, and the book was called Small is Beautiful, Economics as If People Mattered. And that book has never been bettered, in my opinion. It's still as true today as when Schumacher wrote it in 1961 or whenever he wrote it, is that you can't run anything top down. It's all about running stuff bottom up, and it's all about being local and being a community. And for me, having skin in the game, which is another one of Taleb's books, having skin in the game is the thing that makes the difference. If you think about it, I spent a long time working in big corporates, and I had I had a career of middle management and then very senior management in big corporates. And I have to say, the problem that I saw and still see today is that there's no skin in the game. People in management in big organisations aren't held accountable. They just pass rules from one part of the organisation to another. If it all goes wrong, nobody says, oh, it was Roland. He was, you know, he was managing director at the time. Why did he mess it up? Yeah, it's blamed on something else. It's blamed on the rules. It's blamed on this, that, or the other. And we have too many people in leadership positions and management positions that have no talent, have no ability. They got there by saying the right thing, you know, auditioning, and then just following the rules. They don't innovate, they don't do anything useful, they just pass rules and laws and regulations from one place to another. And I don't think that helps. And I don't think that drives us forward. And I don't think that's where innovation comes from. And I believe firmly that innovation comes from small, it comes from local, it comes from people experimenting with things outside of big structures. So for me, I'd just like to finish off by saying small is beautiful, and localism is everything, and it's all about our community. And we're seeing that every day at the moment as people in our communities help each other to try and come to terms with where we are in this horrible thing that's happening to us at the moment. Thank you for listening.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Paul.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been really evident, isn't it, about all the small communities coming together. It's funny you should mention Tim Martin and Branson. The sports director, I think, are another one, aren't they? That are really going to come out of this really sort of a bad because of what they've said, because actually, I mean, Branson, I mean, normally he's pretty good. I mean, normally he has his finger on the pulse, and normally he's pretty good with public relations and things like this.
Yeah.
But he's just, it seems to have got it completely wrong. But yeah, there's so many small firms out there that are actually trying to help people in their local community at the moment. They're offering, we saw Copper Rivet jumped in, they're making Copper Rivet Distillery down in Chatham. They've started making hand gel, which they're distributing to the NHS with Shepherd Neame. I mean, little things like that, you know, which people will remember. You know, once we get over this, and we will get over this in the not too distant future, people will remember that people that helped each other, that locally, that helps them protect their business, protect their family, and those guys will do well. Where the bigger companies, which were obviously trying to protect their profit from the very start, they'll suffer, and I think that's only right, definitely.
What you see, Roland, and it isn't even big things like Rivet and Shepherd Neame, which is fantastic. I'm not knocking that at all. It's fantastic. But even in the normal course of everyday things, I see lots of people in Kent, because that's where I hang out. I see lots of business people doing things for other people just for the sake of doing them for other people, not for a profit motive, not to build their brand. They just help. Yeah, and I could name you dozens of people like Lisa Settle, who's brilliant at doing stuff. You know, she just does it, not for any other reason other than she's a really nice person. And I see that so many times from so many different people, and I think that's what makes the difference. That's the glue that holds a community together.
Definitely. We've seen that on the Together network. I mean, so many people just offering help. You know, people everybody's a Zoom expert now, but 10 days ago when we're still trying to jump on board, with people like Kirsten who are literally just like, right, if anybody needs any help, let's do practice Zoom calls, let's try and help you out. So many people just offering help, even if their skill sets, just helping out free of charge. Let's get through this together. Let's help each other out. And that's where we are. I'm just going to bring in Natasha. So Natasha, you've been listening away there. I mean, what's your sort of view on it? You're very community and locally orientated anyway, so you've got lots of contacts. So how do you feel about it?
Totally agree with what's been said. And for me, I always refer to a book called Creative City by Charles Landry, and he writes about people in the local community being the resources that people need, and that is very much working from the ground up. And I totally agree, things have been done in such a way that's so top heavy for so long, and it doesn't give anybody autonomy, and that is a word that kept springing to mind, and it comes up whenever you're doing things in mental health, in health and social care. It should be health and social care, it should be patient led, and then within community work it should be, people should be given autonomy to be able to make decisions. And when it comes to resources and finances, people should be given the opportunity to make those decisions. And one of the things I was reading about recently was about homelessness and universal basic income, which is something that I think we're still annoyingly very far off from. But the point would be that actually ask a homeless person what they would need rather than just tell them what they should be doing, which is often trying to sign on to do a full-time job when you have significant health and mental health issues and struggle with childhood trauma, which is never going to work very well. And so it's really about asking people what they need. And with what we're experiencing at the moment, that is going to be as an important question more than ever, and asking people what would help support them in their community, and what is it that they most need to be able to get through the grief and recover from the grief that they've experienced.
I totally agree. Yeah,
definitely. I had a few comments come in. Yes, Beverly Bunner was just saying about Lisa is amazing. She completely agrees about Lisa Settle there, as we all do. Gary's just said thank you very much, fantastic overview, Paul. And Ben Leach, again, thanks very much, Paul, very interesting and useful. It's funny, Black Swan events. That's the second lunch and learn in a row we've been talking about a Black Swan event. It's it's funny, like I was saying to Paul, you said they happen sort of quite often.
Yeah.
What sort of other sort of examples can you give us of black swan events that have affected, and then sort of the outcomes after that?
Yeah, I mean, most black swan events are things that haven't been predicted, but then everybody said should have been predicted. So you got classics like the financial crash of 2008. In retrospect, you could have seen it happening, but nobody did, because if they did, there would have at least been some organisations that didn't get sucked into it. Yeah, but you know, one of the problems of top-down organisation for me is that we all follow the same means. We all do the same thing, yeah? One bank starts lending junk mortgages, so everybody piles in, yeah? I used to work in banking, and at the time, I worked in banking before the crash, quite a long time before the crash. But even back then, you'd see so many people piling in and doing the same thing and making the same mistakes, and you think, why are they doing that? Well, they're just following the herd. Everybody sweeps along doing the same thing all the time. And then when something happens, it's a big event because it affects everybody. So you see those kind of events, crashes, boom and bust cycles, and they happen because everybody's doing the same thing. So everybody's affected by the same thing because everything's being run top down. So, you know, things like the 2008 crash was a black swan event. Things like the 1989 dot-com bubble burst was a black swan event. People lost billions and billions of pounds. But now you might, you know, even way back in the 17th century, the great Dutch tulip fiasco was a black swan event. And all of them, in hindsight, are recognisable. So you've got to ask why the entire world missed them in the build-up, yeah? And that's the point about a black swan event. It's always obvious afterwards, but people always miss it in terms of the build-up towards it. And you always get one or two smart asses that went, well, I was telling everybody that was going to happen. But most of us don't really think about it, and we don't really plan. You know, it's like talking about the pandemic at the moment. People are saying, well, why didn't the government buy in 10 million ventilators? Well, can you imagine if a government of any colour, it doesn't matter what politics they were, if a government 5 years ago went, do you know what, we're going to spend 20 billion pounds on ventilators, everybody going, are you mad? We need more nurses, yeah? So it's clever to predict these things afterwards. It doesn't really happen before. So there's been a number of black swan events, you know, really massive ones, you know, like the First World War, for instance, was a black swan event. You know, the Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated in Serbia, which kicked off the whole thing. If that hadn't have happened, the First World War wouldn't have happened. It probably would have happened, but not in the same way. So those kind of major events that pop up once or twice in a generation. Some of us are old enough to have been through 3 of them, actually, but never mind. They're the kind of things that happen, and that they are sea changes. I've been using this as an example just recently. I said I'm a bit of an amateur historian, and I went back and read a lot of the stuff I read about the bubonic plague, because I'm a happy kind of guy. And one of the big things about the bubonic plague that hit Europe in the 13th and 14th century is apart from the fact that it decimated the population of England went from 9 million to 2 million after the bubonic plague, after the Black Death. But one of the things it did is it liberated the 2 million that were left, and it basically ended the feudal system, because there was such a shortage of labour at the end of that people were paid wages to do what before they'd been enslaved to do. And it had a fundamental change on society going forward. Now, we're going to have a slightly different change here at the end of this pandemic, because 5 weeks ago, we had full employment at 2.8% unemployed. It's already 8-9% now. By the time we're through this, it's going to be nearer 15%. So we're going to have a different type of change. We're going to have a lot of unemployed people, a huge amount of unemployed people. But it's also going to reset a lot of the things that we're seeing. And you've already probably seen mutterings about this on social media. For a long, long time, we poo-pooed the idea of shelf stackers, food deliverers, Amazon delivery drivers, agricultural workers and carers, all minimum wage workers. And we're going, oh yeah, you know, just stickies and plebs. They're the only people left standing. Yeah. And I think there's going to be a profound effect on that going forward, where we're going to value those kind of people a lot more than we did in the past, because we've suddenly realised what their value to us is. And funnily enough, talking about it today, the minimum wage goes up today. It's 6.5% increase. It's to a whopping £8.72 an hour. But, you know, I think that's going to be the outpouring of this, that a lot more people are going to be a lot more respectful of those what are classed as minimum wage roles, because we've learned how important they are to the functioning of a society. Yeah, it's lovely being a lawyer or an accountant or a, you know, web designer or whatever, but without the basics of society, you have no society and you have no community. And I think and I hope that we'll recognise that more as we move forward.
Yeah, I think you're right, Paul. Definitely. It's like you say, it's those guys that are actually keeping us all going.
Exactly.
The delivery drivers, the shelf stackers,
yeah.
Bin men. My bin men are due tomorrow. I'm going to
Yeah.
make sure I put a little note on here, just say thank you for keep going.
Yeah.
You know, just to say thank you to these guys which are out there. Again, we're all sat inside, you know, shielded from it all. They're out there putting themselves at risk to actually key workers that actually keep our infrastructure and our day-to-day life going.
Yeah.
So, Natasha, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I read a book that I need to dig out again, but called The Tipping Point, and it was more about smaller changes, a bit like the butterfly effect, really. But I think it's still worth taking that into consideration, and this is like a sequence of lots of different smaller events that are the tipping point. And I always think about how out of World War II we had the NHS at the end of the day, and I think that's really incredible that we need to think about those things that came, and we were on the brink of losing our NHS, and now people are realizing that we are incredibly, you know, incredibly lucky to have the NHS, and that is part of the tipping point. The tipping point can be about appreciation, it can be about entrepreneurship, and seeing about all these companies now that you know, Dyson, who had a bit of a run-in with the government because they wanted to create an electric car and the government wouldn't give them the space, and now being forced to have those discussions around design and working out what is the best in the best for the country, basically in the greater good. And it will force organizations to have to work together, which is absolutely incredible. So we really don't know exactly quite yet what could be formed out of what we're seeing. But I mean, for instance, we've got a 3D printer, and there's an incredible amount of people who are creating personal protection equipment for people in doctor's surgeries. It's something that won't be going into hospitals, but for other staff, this different safety equipment, and an incredible network of people with 3D printers and people that can craft materials. It almost felt like we weren't nearly there yet, unfortunately, with our technology, and now we're gonna have to be, and that will equip us so much better for the future. And we already know that things like machine learning in some countries are really beneficial for actually predicting trends, and again, this will help push to make sure and to hopefully protect us from this happening again. So there's so many things that will come out of it. It's a big lesson to be learned, but it is a tipping point.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an important point, and some important things that Natasha raised there as well. And again, it's something that we didn't dwell on earlier, but I think there's going to be a lot of innovations come out of where we are. And just talking about things like climate change and a new way of doing things, my prediction is that the reality behind our energy needs is that, again, it will be localism. Things like windmills, heat pumps, heat exchangers. I think more and more people will be generating their own electricity in the future, either, you know, as a household if you've got the space, or as a small community if you haven't. You know, if you live in a block of flats, you might have an array of solar panels on the roof, a windmill in the car park, and a heat exchanger that powers the entire block. I'm expecting to see far more local approaches to that, because the renewable energy at the moment doesn't work on a massive scale, but it does work on a small scale. And so therefore I see a lot more small scale approaches to this going forward. Even many years ago, I worked in the nuclear industry, and even now there are people that are working on what are called micro nuclear power stations, and I think that again will help going forward. But again, it's a localism thing. It's something that will only power a town or a small area, but that's what will happen. And I agree. I loved your reference to the tipping point as well, Natasha. It was Malcolm Gladwell that wrote a book. It's a fantastic book, and it's about how things suddenly go mainstream. And there's all kinds of silly examples. My favourite is hush puppies, the shoes. Yeah, I don't know if you remember that from the book. Back in the 70s and 80s, hush puppies, suede shoes, were a thing for a little while, and then they went out of fashion. And I can't remember who it was. It was a punk band of some kind, a very well-known punk band. They went to a concert, and the guy left his shoes behind. So he went into a charity shop, and the only thing they had that were his size were a pair of hush puppies. So he bought them, and within a year, Hush Puppy were back in production and were one of the biggest selling shoe brands again. It just shows you how a local event can spark a whole tipping point.
Exactly.
And a really good friend of mine, Matt Ridley, who's a science writer, he's just about, his book's due to come out in a couple of months. He's just written a book about innovation and creation. And that book's just about to come out, about how things really do get innovated, how things really are created. And again, it normally comes out of accidents, small experiments, and little things that people do. You know, it's very rare that a huge organisation sit there and go, I know, let's invent something. It doesn't happen. Yeah.
And I think that's
good stuff.
Thing, where we're talking about there being like a significant rise in unemployment, this is where organisations have the opportunity to support more people to learn, and it is about education. So a lot of people are going and doing a lot of these free online courses, and for people that we might know that might have you know, they might have additional needs, they might need more support with learning, that should really be encouraged, because you know, that is where there is innovation to be found, and where that is about community cohesion, because everyone then is brought together within that innovation and within creating stronger communities. And I think that's really important. So I definitely encourage for anyone that's thinking, oh, I've got this really good idea, I'll go and do this. Don't just consider the people you know to be really good at those things on that journey. Take people with you who are willing to learn and want to learn, because that is going to build stronger communities.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, I think employment is going to be one of those areas that's going to radically change. You know, it's not really changed for 150 years. We're going to need to look at different ways of employing people, different ways of paying people, different ways of people earning a living. And again, it's not going to be one size fits all. You know, there's lots of different patterns. We have some flexibility in our workforce at the moment, but not enough. And where we do have flexibility, it's not robust enough. So we have 0-hour contracts, but that means that you don't earn enough money if you're not careful. Yeah. So we need to have the flexibility of a 0-hour contract, but with the safety of an earned income. And we've got to think about things like that. And we've got to innovate. We've just got to innovate around the whole thing about how we employ people, how people work. One of the things that's come out of the government scheme for supporting workers during the pandemic that has fallen through the cracks is the amount of people that run personal service limited companies. So they're not being covered by the self-employment scheme, they're not being covered by the employee scheme, and there's over 1 million of them. It's not a small number of people, and they've fallen through the cracks. One of the things that I've already started to talk to people about is when this is over, we need to talk to the government about changing that. The government have been trying to do things with IR35, which is a nonsense. IR35 is just rubbish. It's stupid. And that's a sticking plaster to fix the problem. What they've got to look is what the underlying problem is and make a change. And that's what we need to do, is to have a different type of company, a different type of personal service company that, you know, pays its taxes, but also supports the person that's doing it. So I think there's lots of innovations that are going to come out of this eventually. And most of them are going to be driven from the bottom. That's the main takeaway as far as I'm concerned.
So yeah, it's definitely going to be a different world, isn't it? And when we get out of this, and the next few years, so much is going to change. And also about staying local, about, you know, you talk about the environment there, the power generation, but then after this, are we going to travel as much? Will we need to travel as much? Will people still want to commute up to London from Medway, where we're based? Or their bosses now that have been resisting working from home, resisting remote working, they've bought the technology, they can see it working, they can see their staff being more productive. Are we just going to see more and more staff actually now will work from home, work from co-working spaces, rather than actually having to have that big corporate space that, again, costs them money?
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, it's a bit of a no-brainer, because even in big corporate offices now, they tend to hot desk. Yeah. Back in my day, we all sat in cubicles. Now, if you work in the head office in Canary Wharf, they've got fewer desks than they have employees, because they're not all there at the same time. So all you've got to do is take that concept and move it out. Why have they all got to be in the same expensive building? They don't have to be. Yeah. You can work at home, you can work in a community space. Yeah. You can have a community office, you can have regional offices, but I expect all of those kind of things to happen, because you're absolutely right, Roland. I think that one of the big things out of this will be a much more closed down travelling scenario. Yeah, people aren't going to fly so much. People aren't going to do big commutes as much. And it makes sense if you look at it now. We're all locked at home. The police are chasing people around the Peak District for walking their dog, and 9,000 people are crammed into a tube station going to work in London, and you just think that's crazy. Yeah, absolutely crazy. So all of those things, I think, will change, and I think there will be a big thing for you and I, Roland, that run community spaces. I think we're going to see a lot more community spaces everywhere. You know, that offer different things for different groups of people doing different types of work. I know that you're very similar to me. Most of the people in my space are creatives and designers and programmers and people like that, and I suspect quite a lot of Dragon is like that as well. But I think that there will be community spaces for all kinds of things. One of the things I've talked to people about recently as well is community kitchens. In Kent, we have a lot of food producers. We have a lot of what I call kitchen table food producers who are struggling to scale up their business, because the next scale up is a factory, and they can't afford a factory, but they can't afford to keep producing it on their kitchen table. So one of the things I'm looking at is co-working kitchens, yeah, where we have a big space with a number of kitchens in them, and people can come and prepare their food. And I'm not talking about, you know, making a meal. I'm talking about people like that bottle sauces or, you know, create dishes on a larger scale. So I see things like that happening, and there are already, I think there's a place in Margate, I can't remember what it's called, which is an artist's community space, where they've got photographic studios and art studios and stuff like that. So I think there'll be more spaces catering for different groups of local people doing different things as well.
Do you think there's going to be a big upswell of people actually starting their own businesses as well, sort of local businesses, and people have actually thought, you know what, I want to take responsibility for my own life, what I do. I don't want to be in this situation again, even if it's like just second revenue stream or something. Do you think we're going to see a lot of that sort of happening, especially now people are saying?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. You know, and it's a trend. This is a trend that's been happening for a long time. More and more people are working for themselves to give themselves the flexibility, to give themselves the lifestyle that they need in order to run what are changing family circumstances as well. So at first, I think there may be a little bit of a back blip where people go, oh, well, I was self-employed and in the pandemic, I ended up with no money. Yeah. but I also think that people will go, yeah, but hold on a minute, it's really difficult to get a job now. I'm locked into a job. So I think yes, one, there will be a continued rise in self-employment and small businesses. And two, I think there's going to be lots and lots and lots of opportunities to create products and services based on what we've seen go wrong so far. Yeah. So I'll give you an example. I've been staggered, and this isn't a criticism, it's an observation. I've been staggered by how many small business owners really don't understand how their business is structured. Yeah, so many people didn't understand the difference between a one-person limited company and being self-employed. They're saying, yeah, well, I've got a limited company, but I'm self-employed. Well, no, you're not. You're actually not. So I think there's a whole heap of things to do there in terms of giving people better advice about structures, how to set up a company, what kind of company suits their lifestyle. Now, you're going to get information from an accountant, but the accountant will do it from this is a tax efficient way of doing it, which is great. I don't have a problem with that. But there are other issues. Like, it might be tax efficient, but is it right for me? Yeah. Does it protect me in the way that I want to be protected, or does it allow me to do what I want to do? And I think there's going to be a lot of stuff like that. There's also going to be a lot of opportunities in the insurance business.
Yes.
Yeah. For people to come out with income protection plans. All of this is bolting the stable door after the horse has bolted, of course. But that's where a lot of these things come from. People get bitten by something, and at that point they go, do you know what? That's not going to happen to me again. But of course, as it's a black swan, no, you're right, it isn't going to happen to you again, no matter what. The next one will be something radically different. But I think there will be lots of insurance products suddenly flood the market, offering income protection and stuff like that, because that's what we've all seen.
Definitely. Just had Bev Buns just reminded me. Beth Frost, who runs Curious Cocoa Company.
Yeah.
She's my neighbour. She literally runs across the road from me. She's got an excellent business for making chocolates and things like that. And she does all like farmers markets and things. Wants to scale her business. She's trying to find a production kitchen. Not aware, like I said, not a great big factory, like you said, Paul, but actually a place where she can actually just a small kitchen that she can rent on sort of like a daily, weekly sort of basis. She can't find anywhere. She's really struggled. So what you're saying there, Paul, all these small.
I'm actually talking to someone at the moment, or I was before this thing hit, and they had to shut down completely. But I was talking to someone about this very thing, and it will come. It will, especially now. It will come. There are people around wanting to do, my great friends at Ibiza Fitness Food, they've got a commercial kitchen over in Sandwich. They're looking for commercial space in other places. It's a thing that needs to happen next. It's a trend, and it's going to happen next, and people are going to go into that marketplace and start to open places, especially in Kent, because Kent is a great food producing county. It's one of the things we do. We're a great wine producing county, we're a great beer producing county, and we're a great food producing county. I was talking to someone the other day about viniculture, about growing grapes. It's going to become a multi-billion-pound business for Kent. There's already more than 24 vineyards in Kent already, and as the climate warms up and we start to grow red grapes as well, it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I was just going to say as well, so obviously there's that movement in locally sourced food and in eating more healthily, having more of a plant-based diet and so on. And there's also the development and involvement of the high street, which is just now going to be completely sped up. So whereas I was talking to Roland only what was a few weeks ago about the way the high street will evolve, and we've had those conversations about what companies won't be on the high street for much longer, that has now just leapfrogged. That that is just going to completely change. And that's where we know the future of the high street is going to be around socializing. Oh, thank God, socializing, and about eating and about having time together. And so those community kitchens and having all those small businesses that are around food and and drink will be the ones that will want to be in the high streets, and ideally that is where we end up. And that, in terms of also, if people do start to work from home and from different community spaces, as you say, that reduces the carbon footprint, but also it means people spend their money locally. So exactly. It supports the local economy. So whereas before, lots of different spaces in the area, they tried to do late night openings, like not so much pubs, but if I think of like Cafe Nucleus, only being able to really support a Friday evening late opening, because people go out in London and they spend their money in London because they work in London. Yeah. People are working locally, they spend their money locally, they stay out in the evenings, and it supports the local economy. So fingers crossed. That's what we can do.
I think you're absolutely right, Natasha. I think you're absolutely right. And all of those things are going to happen. That's the positive. From my point of view, that's the positives that's come out of what's happened. This Black Swan event, this pandemic, is that it's going to move us into far more localized, socialized. When this is over, God forbid, soon, but when it's over, there's going to be a huge need to go back out and socialize, because it's the one thing we haven't been able to do. So there's going to be a resurgence in networking meetings. There's going to be a resurgence in street cafes and stuff like that. Just people just want the human contact that it's just not working. And it's lovely talking to people, over a screen, but it's not quite the same, is it?
No.
Definitely not. Well, we're at the end now, but so thank you very much for that, Paul. Thank you very much, Natasha. Really appreciate your input on that. It's really, really interesting, both your views on localism and the community. And I fully agree. I think that's where we're going. It's all going to be about local. And I think this is going to be a massive catalyst for it as well.
Yeah.